Rick Halpern, a white cop, slammed Derek Lawson against his own car on a quiet Atlanta street, accusing him of stealing the very vehicle he owned. Derek stayed calm, focused only on protecting his terrified wife and children even as pain shot through his shoulder. But when a gold governor's pin fell from Derek's jacket, the crowd gasped and everything changed. What will happen when Rick realizes the man he just attacked is the state's highest official? If this true clash of power and justice moves you, like and share this story so more people can witness what unfolds next. I remember that night because it felt like the kind of evening you wish you could fold up and keep in your pocket. Early fall in the suburbs outside Atlanta, air cool enough to crack the windows, trees doing that soft rustle, streets spaced out and sleepy. I was a couple of cars back at a light when I noticed the black SUV in front of me. Inside, silhouettes moved like a small stage play, a tall man at the wheel, a woman turned half around, and two kids bouncing in their seats with the last sparks of birthday energy. You could tell they'd just left a party balloon ribbon floating at the back window, the faint smell of frosting drifting out each time the wind slipped in. The light changed and we rolled forward. The kids were singing off-key, sweet and loud enough to make me smile. The driver, I'd learned later, was Governor Derek Lawson. But in that moment, he looked like any father after cake, and Candle's shoulders dropped a little, hands loose on the wheel, a grin he didn't bother to hide. He reached over and tapped the mom's fingers where they rested on the center console. She laughed, the low kind of laugh that tells you the day was long, but good. From where I sat, I could almost hear him exhale. The whole car felt like relief. When we slowed for the next turn, the SUV's windows lined up with mine. I caught a clear glimpse of Lawson's profile, square jaw, graying hair at the temples, the sort of face you've seen on a podium, but don't expect to bump into at a four-way stop. He said something soft but careful, and because my own window was cracked, I heard it. Just tonight, I'm only a dad. Not a speech, not a slogan. Just a wish, he set down in the dark like a small prayer. The mom, Monica, I'd later hear, squeezed his arm. The little girl hugged a gift bag like it was treasure. The boy blew across a deflated balloon and made his sister squeal. We rolled past a row of ranch houses with porch lights glowing and baseball nets propped in driveways. That's when a patrol car eased onto the road behind us. Nothing dramatic, no siren, no bark of a loudspeaker, just the steady twin blues and reds washing across the rear windows like a tide. I saw the governor's posture change by a few degrees. Nothing you could pin to fear, but enough to make a stranger notice. He flicked his eyes to the mirror, then back to the lanes. Another breath longer this time. The patrol car didn't pass. It matched the SUV for two turns, then a third hanging back just far enough to pretend coincidence. I watched Monica's hand slide from the console to his shoulder. She turned, said something I couldn't hear, then louder. "Did we do something wrong?" Lawson tilted a smile in her direction, the kind you put on to calm children first and yourself second. He shook his head. Both hands returned to 10 and 2. The kids kept humming, unaware that the weather inside the car had shifted by a few degrees. We crossed a small commercial strip, the kind with a dry cleaner, a taco place, and a pharmacy that closes at 9. The patrol car edged closer. The space between bumpers shrank to a single heartbeat. I saw Lawson blink a little slower, pick a lane with more shoulder. It was all small choices that read from where I sat like a man keeping a promise to stay steady. Monica's fingers tightened. The boy looked up at the mirror and frowned. The little girl went quiet without being told. Then the street opened into a wider road, a line of sycamores on the median, and the quiet broke like glass. The siren didn't just start, it tore. A clean, high wail that made every head lift and every window of every parked car throw the sound back at us. The patrol lights didn't glow anymore. They hammered the night red, then blue, then red again, wet and urgent, across the SUV's paint. In the instant between the first two notes of that siren, the singing in the backseat stopped. I heard the girl's voice, very small. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" Lawson signaled before he slowed, even though there wasn't another moving car in sight except me and the patrol unit. He guided the SUV to the curb like it was something fragile, not a machine that weighs 2 tons. He didn't jerk or brake hard or speed up to buy time. He did the one thing you do when little eyes are on you. He made the world look controlled. The SUV settled beside a patch of grass turned silver by the streetlight. The engine idled like a held breath. From my lane, I saw his hands lift off the wheel, and hovered deliberate where anyone could see them. He looked back just once at his son, then at his daughter, and gave a nod that wasn't dramatic, just steady. Monica leaned forward, chin almost on the heel of her hand, measuring the distance in the side mirror the way you do when you don't want to blink. I could feel my own pulse in my wrists, a dull drum against the steering wheel. The patrol car rolled up tight and angled in, boxing them against the curb. The lights washed the inside of the SUV in colors that don't belong on human skin. For a beat, nothing moved. No door opened, no radio cracked. Just that siren throttled down to a mechanical pant, and somewhere a dog started answering it from a backyard. Lawson drew one long breath and let it out through his nose. I watched his shoulders rise and fall, then settle, not brave exactly, not resigned either, but prepared. The kind of prepared you learn from years of having to be. He flicked the hazards on. The tiny amber triangles blinked their polite little warning into the roiling red and blue. I don't know why that detail sticks with me, the courtesy of it maybe, or the way it tried and failed to make the scene ordinary. He adjusted the gear into park with 2 fingers, and without looking down, reached across to squeeze Monica's hand. She didn't say it's okay because it wasn't. She said nothing, and that silence felt like a rope pulled tight. From behind my windshield, a thin film of breath fogged the glass. I wiped a circle clear with the back of my hand. The patrol car's driver's door finally popped open. A boot hit pavement. The night air, which had been kind all evening, turned thin and sharp. Lawson didn't glance back again. He set his jaw, squared himself in the seat, and waited hands. Visible voice unraised, a father who had decided, it seemed to me, that whatever came through that door, his kids would see him calm. The warm night we had all been given folded shut, and what opened in its place was the first page of something hard. He came out of the patrol car like a door being kicked off its hinges. Big frame, wide shoulders, the kind of bulk that reads as policy before you even hear a word. The red-blue lights carved his face into hard angles, and in that strobe his eyes looked like 2 pieces of winter. Later I'd learn his name, Officer Rick Halpern, but in that moment he was just the man the night had chosen to send. He didn't walk, he stalked, boots biting the asphalt, one hand resting on the belt near his holster as if the weight there steadied him. He cut across the beams of his own headlights and came straight to the nose of the black SUV. The family inside went quiet in the way people go quiet when a storm moves over the roof. Halpern slapped his palm down on the hood. It wasn't a tap, more like a gavel. The metal thunk jumped under my ribs. "Shut up and step out now," he barked, a voice rough with authority and cigarettes. "Or I'll drag you out myself." You could hear his words bounce off the storefront glass across the street and come back meaner. The girl in the back seat flinched into her mother's side. The boy's face pinched. His mouth opened, but no sound made it out. Inside the SUV, Governor Lawson didn't lurch or swallow or rush to talk his way out. He moved like someone turning a radio dial from static to a clear station. He lowered the window in a measured arc. Night air slipped in warm from the engine heat and electric from the lights. "Officer," he said, steady as level ground, "is there a reason for this stop?" The sentence sounded simple, but every syllable was set down with care, like bricks in a rainstorm. Halpern leaned into the opening. From where I sat, I could see the muscles along his jaw tick. "Don't get smart with me," he said, breath hot enough to fog the glass. "Hands where I can see them. Now." He said the last word twice without repeating it. He just pushed it out so hard it split in 2. Lawson placed both hands high on the wheel, thumbs visible, fingers relaxed. He turned his head just enough that the kids could see his profile. A father making a lesson out of a moment he never wanted them to study. Across the street, a couple walking a terrier stopped. The man raised his phone halfway, then all the way. Someone behind me in a sedan muttered, "This doesn't look right." Another car idled to a halt without pulling close, its driver angling their camera through the gap between headrest and window frame, like a sniper setting a scope. The sidewalk had a hush to it, that packed kind you hear before a choir sings or a verdict lands. License, registration. Halpern's tone tried for ordinary, but the sneer he wore made the words sound like charges. Lawson nodded once. "I'll reach for my wallet in my inside pocket," he said, announcing each move the way people like him have had to learn to do. "Slow," Halpern snapped, "and keep those hands where I told you." The contradiction hung in the air like wire. Lawson didn't take the bait. He looked at his wife, Monica, and she read the message in his eyes steady. She touched the small of his back through the seat as if to anchor him to the car. He waited a beat long enough to make sure the officer was watching both hands. Then inch by inch he lifted his right palm off the wheel, opened it, and moved to the jacket seam. He paused, opened again, and slid 2 fingers beneath the lapel. The movement was so careful it was almost graceful. He pulled the leather wallet out like it might shatter if handled quick. Behind him the boy sniffled and wiped his face with the heel of his hand. The little girl whispered "Daddy" in a voice like paper. Halpern crowded the window until his chest nearly touched the doorframe. "Step out," he ordered, though the ID was still between Lawson's fingers. The governor didn't argue. He passed the wallet toward the opening. The officer smacked it downward. It hit the door, then the street spit the license half out like a tongue. Halpern flared his nostrils. "I said step out." I watched Lawson make a choice in real time, the one that puts dignity behind safety and still somehow keeps both. He clicked the belt release. The sound was small but felt loud. He opened the door into the red-blue wash and unfolded himself onto the pavement, tall enough that the scene had to adjust. He kept his palms up at shoulder height. The SUV's dome light came on and painted his face the gold of living room lamps. Monica reached for him, but stopped her hand on the edge of the seat, fingers trembling wedding band, catching light like a lighthouse far off. Halpern moved closer, so close I could count the scuffs on his duty boots. He lowered his voice, which somehow made it worse. "Hands where I can see them," he repeated, though Lawson's hands were already a lesson in visibility. The officer's breath hit the governor's cheek. Lawson's jaw flexed once and settled. I don't know what he remembered in that moment, but I remember what I heard in my head, his earlier words drifting back. "Just tonight, I'm only a dad." On the sidewalk, the terrier started barking like a metronome. The man holding the phone whispered, "Keep it steady," to himself or to the world. A teenager on a bike rolled up, planted one foot, and lifted his camera with both hands like prayer. The night changed shape, not louder exactly, but full. Full of attention, full of witness. "Turn around," Halpern ordered. "Feet apart." Lawson obeyed. He placed his license on the roof so his hands could stay high. The metal reflected the red-blue like a tiny river. The officer ran his eyes over the vehicle, not with curiosity, but with a verdict already written. "Nice car," he said, sour. "You sure it's yours?" He let the question hang like a tripwire. Officer Lawson answered, voice still level. "We're returning home from a family birthday. If there's a concern, I'm ready to address it." He kept his words short, the way you do when every extra syllable can be used against you. Monica's face had gone pale in the window. She pressed her lips together so hard a white line appeared. Halpern shifted his stance and tilted his head into the cabin. "Everyone keep quiet," he said to the children, which made the girl cry harder. He straightened and leaned back into Lawson's space. Hands higher. They couldn't go much higher without leaving his body. He raised them anyway, wrists stacked above shoulders, a posture that made him look both surrendered and impossibly strong. Behind me, a horn tapped, once annoyance from someone who didn't yet understand. They were witnessing something they'd talk about for years. The sound died quick. Even impatience knew better here. Phones glowed like fireflies gathered for a warning. A woman down the block said "Lord" under her breath and crossed herself. Then Halpern did something that made the night click into a tighter gear. He bent in until his nose almost touched Lawson's and said, not loud but sharp enough to cut, "Don't make me repeat myself." You could feel the sentence land inside the SUV. The boy inhaled through his teeth. Monica whispered, "Derek." The name sounded like a lifeline thrown across water. Lawson didn't answer the officer's taunt. He answered his family. He lifted his chin a fraction and set his shoulders in that quiet way leaders do when they're most alone. He took a slow breath you could see and let it out steady. He placed his gaze past Halpern's ear, not defiant, not submissive, just refusing to step inside the trap being laid for him. And the street, sensing the line that had just been drawn, went still enough that you could hear the phone cameras, tiny shutters, click by click, beginning the record that would own the next day. The air tightened. The lights did their relentless work. We had all arrived at the edge of something, and the ground for a second felt like glass. I stayed right there at the curb, maybe 15 feet away, when the sound in the night took a sharper edge. Officer Rick Halpern, now I knew his name from the murmurs behind me, let his voice rip through the quiet like a jagged sheet of metal. A black man in a car like this, he barked loud enough to reach the porches on the far side of the street. Must be stolen. Or drug money. The words cracked across the pavement, ugly and deliberate. You could feel people on the sidewalk stiffen, as if the air itself recoiled. A woman behind me gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," and kept their phone steady on record. Governor Derek Lawson stood beside his SUV, back straight, the glow of the hazard lights sliding over his jacket. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he reached into his inner pocket, slow exact, and drew out his wallet. "My license and registration," he said evenly, handing it forward. Halpern didn't even glance down. With a flick of his wrist, he smacked the wallet to the pavement. It hit with a dry slap, the license skidding a few inches across the asphalt. "This is unnecessary," Officer Derek said, his voice still deep and steady, each word clipped clean. The dignity in it was louder than a shout. Halpern took a half-step closer, boots scraping on the street. Without warning, he swung his arm and drove a heavy fist into Derek's shoulder. The sound was a flat, hard crack that echoed against the storefront windows. Derek stumbled sideways into the hood of the SUV, a low grunt breaking from him as metal shuddered beneath the blow. Monica's scream sliced through the night. "Derek," she lunged forward until the seatbelt snapped her back. Inside, their son burst into tears, his small fist beating the air. The little girl's wail rose so high it almost broke. "Stop!" someone from the crowd yelled. "He's not resisting." It was a white woman with silver hair and the stance of someone who'd raised her own children. She held her phone high, trembling but unshaken. Halpern's head whipped toward the voice. "Stay back or you'll regret it," he growled, one hand resting on the butt of his holstered gun. The threat was sharp enough to freeze the whole sidewalk. You could hear the collective intake of breath as every bystander chose between flight and witness. Then came the sound. I'll never forget the mechanical click of steel on steel. In one brutal motion, Halpern wrenched Derek's arm behind his back. The governor bent forward under the pressure, his breath catching as the metal cuffs snapped shut. The clink of the ratcheting lock was louder than the siren had been, a cold punctuation on everything that came before. Phones lit the street like a storm of fireflies, flashes sparking in every direction. The SUV's hazard lights blinked their slow amber against the frantic red and blue of the patrol car, a strange rhythm that made the whole scene feel suspended in time. Every eye was fixed on the tall man, now forced to his knees, a leader turned suspect in an instant. Derek's face stayed composed, but you could see the strain in the set of his jaw. He looked toward the open window, where Monica clutched their children, and somehow managed a nod, small, almost invisible, but full of reassurance. It was the gesture of a man still protecting his family, even as humiliation closed around him like a vice. Around us, the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. The smell of hot metal and late-night rain mixed in the air. From somewhere down the block, a car alarm chirped once and died as if the world itself was startled and then silenced. What had started as a quiet family drive had turned in the space of a few heartbeats into a public spectacle of power and prejudice. And standing there, I knew every camera lens catching that scene was about to carry it far beyond this street, turning one man's humiliation into a question the whole country would have to answer. I can still hear Monica's voice carrying over the patrol lights, a raw sound that seemed to cut through every layer of night. "Please, our children. Please." She was half standing in the SUV, one arm shielding the little girl, the other stretched uselessly toward her husband. The kids were sobbing so hard their small shoulders shook. "Daddy, Daddy," they cried, each word sharp with panic. People on the sidewalk shifted closer, not daring to cross the curb but unable to stay still. You could feel the ache in the air, parents in the crowd squeezing their own kids tighter, strangers blinking back tears. Then another set of headlights washed across the scene. A second patrol car eased in behind the first tires, hissing on wet pavement. Its door opened with a slow creak, and a tall, lean woman stepped out. Later I'd hear her name, Lieutenant Laura Briggs, a ranking officer in the precinct. She moved with an authority that could quiet a room, back straight, dark coat, falling in perfect lines, her face carved into calm angles that gave nothing away. For a heartbeat, the crowd seemed to hope her presence meant reason. Someone whispered, "Finally." Briggs approached the flashing perimeter, her boots clicking like a metronome. The red-blue lights caught the silver strands in her pulled-back hair, outlining a profile that might have belonged to a judge. She stopped beside Rick Halpern, leaned in just enough for the two of them to share a breath, and spoke in a voice too low for most of us to hear, but I was close enough to catch the words, "Make sure it's handled quickly." It was quiet, almost gentle, and it chilled me more than Halpern's shouting. She didn't raise a hand to stop him. She didn't question the cuffs biting into Derek Lawson's wrists. That single line told every witness that what was happening wasn't a rogue act of one angry cop. It was a machine closing ranks. A ripple of disbelief ran through the crowd. Someone near me said, "She's backing him up," in a tone caught between anger and awe. Halpern gave a short nod the kind soldiers give when orders are clear. His grip on Derek's arm tightened. Derek stood taller in response, as if to meet the pressure with his own quiet force. The cameras kept rolling their tiny red dots, blinking like dozens of watchful eyes. The street answered with a new sound outrage. "Let him go," a man shouted from the crosswalk. "He's done nothing," another woman added, her voice cracking but fierce. A chant began low at first, then swelling. "Let him go. Let him go," until it bounced off shop front windows and car hoods. Phones lifted higher. More live streams lit up. I glimpsed the words, "Rushy Justice Now," already scrolling across someone's screen, the hashtag taking flight in real time. Halpern jerked his chin toward the crowd and barked, "Back off or you'll regret it." His free hand hovered over the holster in a silent threat. The chant stumbled but didn't stop. People pulled their children closer, yet kept their cameras steady. A delivery driver parked down the block, raised his phone and called, "We see you." His voice shook but carried. And through all of it, Derek Lawson did something that stopped me cold. He turned his head, meeting first Halpern's glare, and then Briggs's unreadable eyes. Even with his arms pinned and cuffs biting, he spoke with a calm that felt heavier than anger. "You are abusing your power," he said, each word measured and ringing, "and everyone here can see it." The sentence landed like a bell. For a moment, even the flashing light seemed to pause between pulses. The crowd's murmur swelled into a low, defiant roar. Some people cheered the line out loud. Others just whispered yes under their breath, as if the simple truth of it gave them courage. Briggs's face barely moved, but a flicker passed through her eyes, hard to name, gone too quickly. Halpern's jaw clenched. He tightened the cuffs another notch, as if pressure could erase the words. But the statement hung in the humid night air, indelible, and shared by every camera lens and every witness present. I remember thinking that the street itself had taken sides. Porch lights blinked on down the block, like the neighborhood leaning in to bear witness. The chant regained its rhythm. "Hurrah, Justice Now," spread from screen to screen. And in the center of that widening circle, Derek Lawson stood straight, despite the pain, a man outnumbered but not outmatched, declaring to everyone, officers, neighbors, strangers, and the watching world, that power without justice had no right to his silence. I was close enough to hear the scrape of fabric before I understood what it meant. Rick Halpern yanked Derek by the cuff and shoulder, a hard jerk meant to bend him back across the hood. The motion tugged Derek's jacket off center. The lapel flipped, then snagged, then gave. Something small and bright slipped free and pinged once on the metal before skittering down the curve of the fender and landing by the front tire. For half a second, nobody moved. Then the light from a dozen phones found it at once, and the little object lit up like it had a current of its own. A gold pin, no bigger than a quarter, etched with the state crest, that tight wreath and shield you see on official seals and letterheads. The kind of thing you don't buy, the kind of thing you're given, the kind of thing that means you're not just anybody. The boy with the bike 15 maybe leaned in and whispered like he'd just seen a comet. "Hold up," he said to no one and everyone. "Look at that." His camera zoomed. The emblem sharpened, crisp as print, and then the recognition hit him, or maybe he'd seen it on TV, on podiums, on lapels at pressers, and he shouted so loud the street kicked it back. "That's Governor Lawson." The word tore through the crowd like a spark across dry grass. "Governor," someone echoed from the porches. "Governor Lawson," another voice answered from the corner. Heads turned, phones tilted. The sea of red-blue lights suddenly felt smaller than the weight of that single syllable. Halpern faltered. You could see it. His hand kept its grip, but his eyes jumped to the pin, then to Derek's face, then to the ring of cameras closing in. He tried to get ahead of the moment with sound. "Don't believe that," he barked, voice cracking on the last word. He's a fraud, but panic does a poor imitation of certainty, and his expression betrayed him, pupils blown, wide jaw, working a pulse, hammering at the neck. Lieutenant Laura Briggs, who'd stood like a cold column in the wash of lights, went a shade paler. Her gaze snapped to the pin, then to the phones, then to Halpern, and a tiny step backward gave her away. Not retreat exactly, but calculation. The kind of reflex that adds up career camera angle and consequences in a heartbeat. She smoothed her coat sleeve as if the gesture could iron the moment flat. "Governor." The chant rose before anyone organized it, a raw chorus pulled from shock and anger, and the sudden knowledge that this wasn't just a man in cuffs. "Governor, Governor." It rolled down the block and folded back on itself louder each time. Porch lights flared on like witnesses waking. A woman in a housecoat stepped onto her stoop and raised her phone with both hands, lips parted, eyes wet. I watched the pin glint on the asphalt like a dropped commandment. A teenager knelt, palm hovering, then thought better of touching evidence and just framed it tight in his shot. Comments on his live stream scrolled so fast the screen looked like rain. "Is that real? Oh my God, that's the seal. I voted for him. This is happening right now." Then all caps, a wave of the same word marching down like a banner. "Governor!" Halpern tried to reset the script with volume. "Everyone back up." "Phones down," he shouted, but the order landed like a bad joke. A delivery driver in a stained polo shouted back, "We're not blind." A woman with silver hair, the same one who'd stood tall earlier, planted her feet and said clear as a bell, "We know who he is." Monica, still half twisted in the SUV, had stopped crying. Her breathing was ragged, but her eyes had a steadiness that hadn't been there a minute before. She saw the pin, saw the crowd, saw the way the tide had shifted, and some new kind of strength found her posture. She pressed her palm against the window, not in plea now, but in witness. Derek Lawson, still cuffed, still bent by force. He didn't deserve, did not lunge for the pin, did not argue, did not announce himself. He simply lifted his chin. The move was small, quiet, and it rearranged the air. He met Halpern's gaze the way a canyon meets wind, unbothered by the noise. Then he turned his head and looked at Briggs, not with hatred, not even accusation, but with a kind of deep, exhausted clarity that says, "You know exactly what this is." It worked like a mirror. For a heartbeat, Briggs seemed to see herself in it and didn't like the view. She breathed in to speak, then didn't. Her jaw tightened, her hands slid into her coat pockets, an officer's version of taking a step back from the cliff. The chant swelled again, "Governor, Governor," and a new sound joined it. The crisp ping of notification after notification, the digital chorus of platforms pushing live videos to the surface. On my screen, a local station's account went live from 2 blocks away. Another feed pulled a split screen, our street on one side, a still of Governor Lawson at a recent press conference on the other, same jawline, same gray at the temples, same small gold pin at the lapel. The captions wrote themselves, "Breaking, developing, watch." Halpern's denial fell apart in stages. First came the stammer, he's impersonating, then the reach for procedural language, for officer safety, then the glare that begged his superior to reclaim the field. But there are nights when the field refuses to belong to anyone except the truth, and this was one of them. The truth was a bright coin-sized thing on the pavement, and a tall man refusing to be unmade by cruelty. "Pick it up," someone called, meaning the pin. "Show them." No one moved to do it. Even the most furious among us understood that the pin had become more than an object. It was a live wire. A kid in a hoodie sank to one knee and aimed close enough that the state crest filled his frame. "It's him," he whispered for his viewers. "It's really him." I kept waiting for Derek to claim his title, to throw the words, "I am the governor," like a lifeline or a weapon or a shield. He didn't. He stayed with the only identity he had announced all night, the one he'd spoken in the quiet before the siren, a father. He angled his body so his kids could see his face, not the back of his head, and he held their gaze. Everything else, the chant, the lights, the rank, the cameras, spun around the stillness of that look. Lieutenant Halpern said, voice low, almost pleading. Briggs finally spoke, also low, also careful. "Control the scene," she said. "Not release him, not uncuff him." Just those 3 words shaped to mean, contain the optics. The crowd heard the choice in her silence and answered with another wave of governor, louder, angrier, more certain. The boy with the bike looked up from his screen and yelled, "We're live to 20,000. The number leapt to 30, then 50. A woman further back called her sister on speaker and held the phone in the air. "It's him," she said, voice shaking. "They've got the governor in cuffs. Right here." And still Derek said nothing. He used silence the way some men use a podium. He let the truth assemble itself without his hand on it, because the truth, once it starts rolling downhill, is better for not being pushed. He stood there, wrists, burning shoulder, throbbing eyes steady, and turned the weight of his quiet into a verdict the night had to hear. I didn't know it yet, but we had just crossed the midpoint, the hinge of the story. The second the pin hit the pavement, the street shifted from a scene to a statement. The cameras had what they needed. The country was about to have something to argue about at breakfast. And Halpern, who only minutes ago looked like the biggest thing on the block, suddenly seemed small, a man caught, standing on the wrong side of a bright line he couldn't see until it was too late. By the time the clock rolled past midnight, the street outside that Atlanta neighborhood had already turned into something bigger than a single arrest. I know because I sat awake long after getting home, phone buzzing with updates that refused to let the night go quiet. George Miller, the gray-bearded veteran who had been live streaming from across the street, had posted his full video before dawn. By breakfast, it wasn't just a clip, it was a tidal wave. Within hours, it had been mirrored on every platform you can name. And when I checked again at sunrise, the counter on his feed showed numbers so high it barely looked real. Millions of views climbing by the minute. Morning newscasts led with it like breaking weather. Governor Derek Lawson detained scrolled across the bottom of screens from New York to Los Angeles. Local anchors replayed the moment the Gold State pin hit the pavement on a loop, the sound of phones clicking like applause. National outlets sent crews to the scene before the first commuters finished their coffee. Helicopter shots circled the block, where it had all started showing a street that now looked like a pop-up newsroom. Satellite trucks and camera tripods lined the curbs that only hours earlier had held sleepy driveways and porch lights. Inside the state capitol, the phones wouldn't stop. You could feel the pressure without stepping inside the building. The governor's own staff, those who had gone home expecting a routine evening, were suddenly fielding urgent calls from the Department of Justice and even the White House. By mid-morning, a senior official from D.C. was on record demanding a full and immediate investigation. A spokesperson from the Attorney General's office called the detention potentially unlawful and promised federal oversight. Every half hour, a new statement landed, each one sharper than the last, each one carrying the weight of national attention. Reporters poured into the neighborhood until the sidewalk looked like a press conference that hadn't been scheduled. Boom mics crowded the driveway. Photographers crouched for better angles of a car that wasn't even there anymore. The flash of bulbs turned the quiet cul-de-sac into a daylight of its own. A young producer from a cable network kept repeating into her earpiece, "Live hit in 2 minutes," while another updated a satellite van driver who hadn't slept. And then there was Monica. By the time the first morning interviews aired, she had become the steady heart of the story. Sitting beside her children on a neighbor's porch, still wearing the same soft sweater from the night before, she faced the cameras with a mix of exhaustion and resolve. Her voice wavered but never broke as she said, "No family should face this terror for simply driving home." It was less a soundbite than a plea, but it moved like wildfire. Within an hour, that single sentence was captioned, shared, and subtitled across every feed I scrolled. People quoted it like scripture. No family should face this terror. You could see it on morning shows and church group chats and under headlines on national newspapers' front pages. By late morning, the reaction had outgrown the screens. The chant that had begun with a few neighbors the night before Governor Justice was now echoing in real city streets. From the steps of the New York Public Library to the sidewalks of downtown Chicago, people gathered holding hand-lettered signs. "Justice for Lawson, stop the abuse of power, protect our families." Police scanners reported peaceful marches in half a dozen cities before noon. In California, commuters paused at freeway overpasses to hang banners with the governor's name. Someone projected the words "Justice for Lawson" across a Los Angeles high-rise so large you could read it from an airplane. Even those who hadn't voted for him joined in. That surprised me. Most veterans in ball caps, church elders, parents pushing strollers, all saying that, whatever their politics, a man driving his family home should not face this. Their posts and live feeds blended into a single national voice. The hashtag #Justice for Lawson that started in a teenager's hand the night before had become the country's morning headline, trending above sports finals and celebrity scandals. Back at the original street, the quiet suburb was now a live set for every major outlet. Reporters relayed new statements from Washington and from the governor's own office. Words like constitutional rights, systemic reform, and civil rights investigation threaded through every microphone check. Federal officials promised a rapid inquiry. The mayor called for calm, but acknowledged the gravity of an event that speaks to every American family. Through it all, Derek Lawson himself stayed mostly silent. Released before dawn, he kept to a private residence, issuing only a brief written note, thanking neighbors for their courage and calling for peaceful response. That silence only deepened the public's attention. People leaned in, waiting for his first on-camera words. By midday, what had begun as one traffic stop had become a national reckoning. From crowded city squares to small-town diners, strangers were repeating Monica's line, "No family should face this terror like a shared vow." And as helicopters hovered over the cul-de-sac and cable networks counted down to the governor's next move, it was clear that this wasn't just news anymore. It was a movement, and it was still gathering speed. By late afternoon, the fight had moved indoors to a windowless briefing room on the third floor of precinct headquarters. I wasn't in that room, but you didn't need a seat at the table to feel the temperature. You could read it on the faces coming and going, on the tight shoulders and short steps on the way. Officers avoided each other's eyes in the hallway, like people passing a hospital door they didn't want to open. Word leaked fast, an emergency meeting, all ranks, no phones. Inside, a veteran lieutenant, a black man whose name the city knew from community events and retirement rumors, stood up before anyone else found their voice. He didn't need a microphone. "We swore to protect justice," he said, the syllables clean and heavy, "not criminals with a badge." The line carried through the room like a door slamming. Chairs creaked. Someone coughed just to make sound. Mostly there was silence, the kind that's less about respect and more about reckoning. He kept going. He talked about years of looking the other way, of reports written in a language polished, smooth enough to hide bruises. He said the quiet part out loud, that Rick Halpern's rage wasn't a lightning strike, but a forecast, that the weather had been building for a long time. When he finished, he didn't sit down so much as fold into the chair, drained like a man who had finally carried a weight to the floor. Not everyone agreed. A captain tried to wrap the moment in policy, clearing his throat and offering phrases like rapidly evolving circumstances and officer safety protocols. It sounded like a script pulled from a drawer marked "in case of fire use words." But the room had already shifted. The old incantations didn't work. While they argued upstairs, the front steps of headquarters turned into a vigil. I stood with the crowd as evening crept in, candles bright against the building's cold stone. People held signs and cell phones in the same hand, chanting, then falling quiet, then chanting again. No one above the law rolled down the block and bounced back from the glass. The phrase fit the night like it had been waiting for it. Every time the lobby doors opened, the sound rushed inside as if it could rinse the place clean. That's where I was when the first rumor about a whistleblower reached us, not shouted, not posted, just passed from one person to the next with a care that made me believe it. A young officer, the story went, had seen enough and sent a bundle of files to a reporter he trusted. Not wild speculation, not revenge, documentation, complaints, internal emails, even audio. Minutes later, my phone lit up with the confirmation. A local paper pushed a breaking banner. A national site followed. Then the clip arrived, 30-odd seconds of a recorded call. The transcript choked me. The audio finished the job. A woman's voice, precise and low. "Lieutenant Laura Briggs. Don't report every detail," she said. "Keep it clean. Not shouted, not sloppy. Surgical. The kind of instruction you give when you know exactly which truths make trouble." The crowd listened in silence, the way people listen to eulogies. It wasn't news that systems protect themselves. It was something else to hear the bolts turned. A man next to me, the kind who'd call himself apolitical, shook his head like the sound had hit bone. "She said it like she was ordering coffee," he muttered. "Like it was normal." Inside the precinct, normal was breaking apart. Officers who had kept their heads down for years found themselves staring into a mirror they didn't control. Some looked furious for the first time. Others looked terrified. A few looked relieved, as if a secret they'd carried had finally been dragged into daylight, where it could stop poisoning them. The lieutenant who had spoken earlier asked for the floor again. Enough, he said, softer now, but somehow larger. Enough, and the word sounded like both a demand and a promise. In the back of the room, a young officer, maybe the whistleblower, maybe someone watching him, wasn't looking at the front anymore. He was looking at the exit. Outside, the vigil became a roar. No one above the law turned into open. The files turned into charge them both. The chant wasn't a storm. It was a tide. It didn't flash. It pushed. I watched a row of patrol officers posted on the steps glance at one another with expressions that said they heard the message and recognized themselves in it. Then my screen buzzed again, another clip, this one longer, tougher to swallow. Body cam audio from a prior stop, Halpern's voice familiar, now squeezed through clenched teeth. A muffled whimper. Dead air where procedure should have lived. It ran like a reel of all the things people had claimed for years and been told they couldn't prove. The bystanders around me didn't cheer. They went still. Truth can do that, make a crowd quiet, because the thing you wanted is also the thing that hurts to hold. Reporters crowded the tape line. Microphones tilted toward the doors that remained shut. The mayor's office released a statement promising cooperation. The union pushed back with talk of due process. But the gravity had already settled. You could feel it. The case was no longer an isolated event. It was a vein leading back into a heart that needed surgery. The meeting upstairs broke without a resolution anyone believed. I heard later that some officers walked straight to internal affairs, that a few made statements they should have made years ago. I also heard that others stayed behind, whispering about optics and timelines and how long to keep their heads down. Everybody chooses a side, whether they say it out loud or not. As night took the building, the crowd lit more candles. Wax pooled on the stone like small, stubborn suns. A choir from a nearby church started a hymn, and the line between protest and prayer blurred in the best possible way. People cried. People held hands. People waited. Then the alert we'd all been expecting finally hit like a drumbeat. The district attorney had moved formal charges, pending review of the leaked materials. A judge authorizing emergency subpoenas for records, and internal suspension for Halpern and Briggs while the investigation accelerated. The headline wrote itself in every throat on the steps. We didn't cheer so much as exhale. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was the door to a room we'd been told didn't exist. The recordings had done what years of rumors hadn't. They pinned names to actions and pulled the curtain on command. From that moment forward, there was no safe script left for Rick Halpern or Laura Briggs. The next chapter wouldn't be written in briefing rooms. It would be written under oath. And you could feel the whole city for the first time since the siren split. The night allowed itself a sliver of hope. The courthouse felt too small for the day it was asked to hold. By the time I made it through security, the corridors were already a living current. Reporters with badges clipped high, federal observers in dark suits. Neighbors who'd been there that first night gripping manila folders like lifelines. When the doors to hearing room 3 opened, a hush moved in ahead of us. Rows filled in seconds. Cameras obeyed the court's rules and stayed outside, but their absence only made every breath sound louder. At the front, the panel took their seats, stern alert pens ready. The prosecutor rose before the scrape of chairs could settle. No theatrics, just posture and purpose. Today he began voice carrying to the last row. Without strain, we examined not just an assault, but a system of abuse. The sentence landed like a gavel. You could feel people straighten as if the words had adjusted the room's spine. Rick Halpern sat at counsel table. Broad shoulders slumped just enough to suggest he finally understood what gravity felt like. He kept his eyes on a legal pad he wasn't writing on. 2 seats over, Lieutenant Laura Briggs looked like a stone taken from a river, smooth on the outside, worn thin beneath. The prosecutor opened with "The street, our street." He cued the city's traffic camera, then a neighbor's doorbell recording. We watched the patrol car shadow the governor's SUV for blocks. No violation called, no probable cause cited. Then came the live stream angles, phones capturing the moment the hood was struck. The wallet knocked the fists and the cuffs. The prosecutor didn't narrate. He let the images do the talking and returned to the mic only to mark the timestamp, to note policy numbers, to set one fact beside another, until they began to lean toward a single conclusion. When it was the defense's turn, Halpern's attorney tried to stitch a familiar cloth. Instinct for safety, he said a phrase he wore like Kevlar. He spoke of rapidly evolving circumstances, of split-second decisions, of threat assessment. He gestured toward Rick with an open palm, as if presenting a veteran firefighter who had run into heat, not created it. The prosecutor stood again and with a simple, "let's test" that began sliding bricks out from the wall. He showed body camera footage where none of the alleged threats appeared, no sudden moves, no hidden hands. He read the department's own use of force policy line by line until the language felt like a ruler held to a crooked seam. He played the first audio leak, Briggs's voice precise and quiet. "Don't report every detail, and let the sentence hang long enough for the panel to look at her, then back at their notes." When the defense tried to reset, the prosecutor cued a clip I didn't know existed. The inside angle from a small shop across the street, captured by a camera tucked behind a lottery counter. George Miller had found it, the prosecutor explained briefly, and secured permission to present it. The monitor flickered, then brightened. The angle was wide, grainy at the edges. Through the front glass, we saw the scene we all knew, but then a sliver of the patrol car's interior edged into view in the reflection. Halpern's arm lifted, his fingers touched the holster. Another officer, faceless in the frame, reached and laid a hand across Rick's forearm. The hand wasn't forceful, it was begging. The gun stayed put. In the hearing room, a collective intake of breath sounded like a single wave pulling back from shore. The defense rose hard. "Perspective," he argued. "Reflections distort angle and intent." He tried to build doubt out of pixels, but the prosecutor didn't argue optics. He brought out the manual again, firearm readiness, immediate threat, proportional response, and matched the terms to the images as if threading a needle through a row of beads. Then it was Briggs's turn. She stood with a poise trained by years of command. "My superiors," she said, "instructed me to limit details to prevent public panic during ongoing investigations." She spoke of politicized oversight of a governor with opponents of a city on edge. She gestured to the gallery as if to say, "See, even now the crowd is proof." For a second I thought it might stick. The prosecutor waited, not patient so much as precise. "Lieutenant," he said, "let's listen again." He pressed play on a second recording, longer this time. Briggs's voice came through clear as a winter morning. "Keep it clean. No mention of force unless there's broken skin." A pause. Then quieter. "We can't afford that headline this quarter." It wasn't a rogue cop talking. It was a strategy meeting. Briggs didn't collapse. She diminished. Shoulders drew in by an inch, jaw. Tightened eyes found a place on the wood where there were no people to look back. Her attorney leaned toward her, whispered, and whatever the plan had been, it was now ash. Witnesses followed the silver-haired woman from the curb, the delivery driver, the teenager with the bike, now wearing a too large dress shirt and speaking into a microphone like it might break if he pushed too hard. Each told a sliver of the same story, and the slivers matched. When it was George Miller's turn, he carried the room like a choir carries a note. He explained how he tracked the reflection angle, how the shop owner had offered the footage without hesitation, how he'd been a soldier once and knew the difference between fear and fury. He wasn't scared, George said of Halpern. He was sure he could get away with it. No one applauded. We didn't need to. The truth doesn't always want noise. The defense made one last attempt with a stack of printouts, crime statistics maps, with red dots, training schedules. It all felt like weather reports after a roof has already caved in. The panel's pens moved, but their faces said they were done being impressed by charts. Near the end, the prosecutor glanced to the first row, where Derek Lawson sat with Monica and the children. He didn't call the governor as a witness, no political theater. He simply asked the panel to consider the simplest measure of all what we had all seen and heard. He closed with the same line he'd opened, softened by the hours but heavier for what they now held. Not just an assault, he said, a system. Before the panel recessed, something happened that wasn't on any schedule. Derek rose. He didn't go to the stand. He didn't address the defense. He turned to the room, to the men and women who had left breakfast dishes in sinks and workstations unmanned to sit in these rows, and said, voice low, "But carrying justice is not a gift. It is a right." No flourish, no applause line intended. And yet the sound that followed, hands clapping throats, catching a few full sobs that were part grief and part relief, filled the chamber anyway. The panel let it run for a breath before the chair's gavel called us back. We settled, but something in us had shifted. We had come to watch a case. We were leaving having witnessed a reckoning. The courtroom that morning felt like the center of the country's heartbeat, I got there before dawn, yet every bench was already crowded. Journalists hunched over laptops, neighbors from that Atlanta block, clutching coffee cups, federal observers in dark suits, speaking only in nods. The murmur of voices filled the air, like the hum of a power line, until a single sound cut it clean the judge's gavel. One strike. The room froze. Court is now in session, the clerk announced, and then quieter but heavier. This is the matter of the state versus Officer Rick Halpern and Lieutenant Laura Briggs. For a long breath, nothing moved. Even the air seemed to listen. Rick Halpern sat at the defense table like a man suddenly aware of gravity. His uniform was gone, replaced by a plain gray suit that did nothing to hide the bulk of a body built for control. The bravado of that first night was gone too. He stared at the table knuckles pale against the wood. A few feet away, Laura Briggs held herself with a brittle stillness, her hair pulled tight, jaw locked. Every so often she glanced toward the gallery, but her eyes skated over us as if looking anywhere else might undo her. The prosecutor stood voice low and deliberate. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, today's verdict is not merely about one night. It's about whether those sworn to protect the law believe they stand above it. His words landed like slow thunder. He recapped the evidence, body cam footage, leaked audio, eyewitness testimony, the shop camera reflection of Rick's hand reaching for his gun before a colleague stopped him. Each piece of proof felt like another stone laid on a scale already heavy with guilt. When he sat down, the judge's eyes moved to the defense. Rick's lawyer rose, tried to breathe life into an argument that had died days earlier. Instinct for safety, he repeated, almost pleading a split-second judgment call. He mentioned crime statistics and officer fatigue, but each phrase sounded thinner than the one before. Briggs's attorney leaned on politics, pressure from above, she claimed, in a city charged with unrest. Yet the leaked audio, Laura's own voice saying, "Keep it clean, no mention of force, unless there's broken skin," hung over every sentence like a ceiling about to collapse. The judge listened, hands folded, face unreadable. Then she lifted the gavel. Her voice was steady, but you could feel the weight behind every word. This court finds Officer Rick Halpern guilty of aggravated assault under color of authority and of falsifying official reports. He is hereby stripped of his badge and rank and sentenced to a long-term prison term with no possibility of parole. The last phrase, no possibility of parole, echoed like iron locking in place. She turned to the next table. Lieutenant Laura Briggs is found guilty of conspiracy to obstruct justice and of willful misconduct in public office. She is hereby dismissed from the Atlanta Police Department, stripped of pension rights, and referred for federal prosecution. The room exhaled a sound somewhere between relief and disbelief. A few people clapped once before catching themselves. Then the stillness returned deeper than before. From the front row came movement, life rushing back after weeks of holding breath. Monica Lawson stood first, hands trembling, and folded Derek into an embrace that seemed to anchor the whole room. Their children ran forward, the boy burying his face in his father's jacket, the girl pressing her cheek to his chest. Derek bent to them, the cuffs gone, now his arms free at last. They stayed like that for a long moment, a small island of quiet in the middle of the storm. Reporters lowered their cameras for once, giving the family a circle of space. Some wiped their eyes. I realized I was doing the same. Outside, the sound built before we even reached the doors. A deep, rising chant, thousands of voices waiting in the square, rolled through the courthouse walls. As Derek and Monica stepped onto the wide stone steps, the crowd erupted. Justice has been served. Justice has been served. The chant hit like a wave, strong enough to rattle the flagpoles and shake the windows. Television crews caught every angle, candles held high, banners unfurled, strangers hugging as if they'd known each other all their lives. Live feeds carried the moment into living rooms and cafes across the country. People who had never met Governor Lawson were crying with the kind of joy that comes from watching something long overdue finally arrive. Derek paused at the top step, his children's hands in his. For a moment he simply looked out at the square, packed with neighbors and strangers, at the cameras streaming to millions, at the sky beginning to turn gold with late afternoon light. He didn't make a speech. He didn't need to. The verdict had already spoken louder than words. Behind him, the courthouse doors swung shut with a heavy thud, like the punctuation on a chapter the nation had been forced to read. The case had begun as a traffic stop on a quiet street. It ended as a landmark in the fight for justice, a reminder that no badge, No rank, no system is stronger than the truth when people are brave enough to carry it into the light. By the next morning, it wasn't just a verdict anymore. It was a movement. Everywhere I turned, screens glowed with the same image: Governor Derek Lawson kneeling to embrace his children in the courthouse aisle, a quiet half-smile on his face, while their small arms wrapped around his neck. The photographs seemed to travel faster than light itself. On social media, the hashtag #JusticeForLawson swept across feeds like a rising tide, first local, then national, then global. It wasn't just a trend, it was a rallying point. People used it to share stories of their own encounters with injustice, to call for reform, or simply to say thank you for standing your ground. By dusk, the courthouse square had transformed into something that felt almost sacred. Candles lit every step, every stone ledge. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces glowing in soft gold. A choir from a nearby church began to sing, and soon thousands of voices joined them in a single line that floated through the warm night air. Justice belongs to everyone. The words rolled over the plaza like a river, steady and unstoppable, until even those of us who couldn't sing found ourselves humming along. It wasn't protest now. It was a shared memory forming in real time, a collective promise that what happened here would not fade. Late that evening, Derek Lawson finally stepped up to the microphone set beneath the courthouse pillars. He wore the same dark suit from the trial, but the posture of a man carrying only his truth. He let the crowd settle before he spoke. "I'm angry," he began, the honesty of the first words startling in its simplicity, but angry to make change, not to seek revenge. The square held its breath. He continued, "Tonight, I accept the responsibility to lead a federal task force on police reform. We will look hard at training oversight in the culture that allowed this to happen. We will not waste this pain." The cheer that followed was less an explosion than a deep, rolling affirmation, like the sound of something heavy being lifted together. Behind him, Monica stepped forward, their children drowsy but determined to stay by their parents' side. She placed a gentle hand on Derek's shoulder and faced the lights and cameras. Her voice was quiet, but every word carried. "No mother should watch her children cry like that because of injustice," she said. For a long second, no one moved. Then applause broke out, not the scattered clapping of ceremony, but the kind that comes when people feel a truth settle into their bones. As the night stretched on, candles kept burning. Some people began to pray aloud. Others simply stood in silence, letting the music and the memory do their work. The gold governor's pin, rescued from the pavement and polished clean, rested now in a small glass case at the base of the courthouse steps. In the soft glow of candlelight, it shone like a tiny sunrise, a quiet emblem of what had been risked and what had been won. Walking away well past midnight, I kept thinking of that pin. In the low light, it didn't look like metal anymore. It looked like a question turned into light, a question aimed at every one of us. What will you do to protect justice? That question, more than the verdict, more than the chance, was what stayed with me. Because the story of Derek Lawson wasn't just about one man's dignity or one family's courage. It had become a living reminder that justice isn't a favor we receive. It's a right we must keep choosing every day together. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful journey. Derek Lawson's story reminds us that justice is not a gift. It's a right we must protect together. It shows how courage, unity, and love for family can turn a night of fear into a movement for lasting change. If this story moved you, please like the video and share it with friends and family so more hearts can feel its impact. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Max Stories for more meaningful, true-to-life stories that spark hope and action. Your support is the heartbeat of Mr. Max Stories. It gives our team the strength to keep creating stories that shine a light on justice and human dignity.